Wednesday, June 10th, 2020 meeting of the Middleton Board of Selectmen. Due to the state of emergency in Massachusetts due to COVID-19 outbreak, the meeting will be held via Zoom, an internet-based meeting space. It is the intent that the virtual meeting space will be made accessible to the public. And a full and complete transcript of this meeting will be posted. By checking in, you give your permission to have both your voice heard as well as your picture broadcast. And we have, well, I guess we have a public comment. Anybody? I saw some names I didn't recognize, so.
I actually caught Tim.
Yeah.
Jill Mann. I just had a question. I don't know if you want me to talk about it now or at the 5:50. So I had seen that Middleton was contemplating doing the reduction in the quorum to 35, and I didn't know if the petition had been submitted to the court. And I was curious, you know, did we look into doing anything like the town of Topsfield did with having it outside so that we could encourage people to come?
We did. We started doing it through the court, and then we didn't need to because the governor passed legislation. I mean, not the governor, but the legislature passed legislation allowing the town meetings to go down to the 10% if we wanted to vote on it.
Right.
So we had originally sent our counsel into court to do that, but now it's not necessary.
Well, if the board votes, so are you going to talk about that? I'll just wait.
Talk about whether
okay, I'll wait till you bring it up. I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We like having people on open public comment. We'd like to have more people comment.
Oh, I don't think you do. I'm teasing.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, is it anybody else have public comment? Hearing none, we'll close that. Okay, we now have our a review and discussion of the June 24th annual town meeting to review legislation and a court petition with respect to a reduced quorum vote and to close and sign the annual town meeting warrant. Mr. Sheehan.
So at the time that we posted the agenda, the legislation on Beacon Hill had been passed by both houses, I think, but not signed by the governor. I think that was the situation. I think it was signed by the governor Friday night. So as a result of the legislation, Chapter 92 of the Acts of 2020, the petition that we had directed council to file became unnecessary and therefore moot. And so he did not pursue that. The hearing, initially we were hopeful the hearing would have been on Thursday of last week. It then got postponed and it wouldn't have happened until today at the earliest. And so once the legislation got passed, it made the most sense to just piggyback on that and take advantage of that. It gives us all of the flexibility that the injunction or the court order would have given us. So as I told the board over the weekend by email, we posted on Monday morning or on Monday the notice requirements under Chapter 92. We posted at Memorial Hall, on the website, by e-blast, on the cable bulletin board, and through social media, of the board's intention to discuss a reduction in quorum at its meeting next Tuesday. So that's a 7-day notice requirement that was in the statute. That gave us enough time to get the notice out there and have it on the agenda for next Tuesday to discuss whether to reduce the quorum for the annual town meeting on June 24th. Related but separate from that, and the real meat of tonight's discussion is what exactly is going to be on the warrant. I did send out a late email today, and I don't know if everybody saw it, just kind of laying out what I felt we needed to do tonight. The statute, Chapter 92, that was passed last week, does not place any limitations on what town meeting can entertain. So earlier versions had said you can only take up essential articles, and essential was sort of poorly defined, but taken to mean necessary for spending for the ensuing fiscal year. The statute that was passed does not have that same limiting language, so the board could take up the entirety of the warrant, or it could take up just a portion of the warrant, essentially just the, as I laid out in the email, just the I think it's 11 budget items, which is Articles 1 through 10 and 12, I think it is. I misspoke in my email. Should be 1 through 10 and 12, not 1 through 10 and 11. Okay. That would be 1 through 11. So Article 11 is no longer necessary at all and can be removed altogether. We will bring that back at some later point. That was the one that allows the superintendent of schools to enter into a 5-year bus contract. So Articles 1 through 10 and 12 are directly related to fiscal year 2021. So those would be, in my mind, and this is supported by council, those would be essential articles. The other one that is a little bit gray is the citizens petition article for the last one, Article 17, $20,000 for the costs associated with acquisition or disposal of property. Chapter 39, which is the statute that governs town meetings, implies, there's always enough gray area in these things, but implies that the board has no choice but to put a petition article on a town meeting if the required number of signatures were provided. And so I think in this case, that is one that probably would qualify as essential unless the applicant is willing to bypass that article. The other 5 articles, 4 articles, 13 through 16. So those are, that 13 is an amendment to the revolving fund bylaw. 14 and 15 have to do with the personnel bylaw and the charter provisions relating to personnel. And then 16 is the groundwater protection bylaw. If the board wanted to limit the warrant to just the essential articles, those 4 articles, 13 through 16, could be taken off. The moderator and the town clerk are on, and they spoke last week about this, and I'm sure they won't be bashful tonight about weighing in if the board wants to hear from them.
So I'm, in favor of doing the reduced quorum and not including those articles 11, 13 through 16. Because anything with zoning and bylaw and charter changes shouldn't be decided on a smaller quorum basis. And the citizens petition, I don't think we have a choice. We have to include. So that's where I'm at.
We can ask, and I would like the ask to be made. And I would like us to contact him, because I think he's a reasonable person, and say, especially in light of other things that have happened, that, hey, listen, this is a reduced town meeting. You got 10 people. Quite frankly, you could have 10 people that don't like you and have nothing to do with your thing, and it could go shut down. So I'm in agreement with you, Costa, but I would like to do the ask of Eric and just say.
No problem with that.
Yeah, I agree with the 13 through 16 not being included. If things are better in the fall, we can include those in a fall town meeting. If not, bring some of these charter change and zoning items back next spring. And if Eric Cudmore and the signatory members of the citizen petition want to move it, and they may think for purpose of getting their issue advanced, they may want to move it. So, but I think for purposes of tonight, we should approve the warrant, because I know we approved 2 warrants at our last meeting. So I think we should rescind those 2 votes and make a vote that would include Articles 1 through 10, Article 12, and Article 17. And should the initiative petition sponsors want to postpone, we can take no action on that at town meeting.
Yeah, that's a good, if I could jump in, Mr. Chairman, that's a good point that Brian makes. We will probably not be able to get an answer out of Eric Cudmore, petitioner on that petition Article 17. We need to get this thing posted and get it to print and get the mailer out. So we will talk to him. If we pass over that, it's probably going to be, well, it'll have to be on the warrant, but we'll see if he's interested in taking no action.
Anything further from any selectmen?
And I would just ask if the initiative petition sponsor would like to postpone this, even though we're taking no action. I would expect that if we have a fall town meeting, it would just roll over to the fall, or would he have to start the process over again?
The board, by its action, can agree to put it on the next town meeting.
Yep. Okay.
That way he doesn't have to go chasing.
Yeah, it's not a lot of signatures, but still, thank you.
Well, for a special, it becomes 100. So it's more work. It's only 10 for an annual, 100 for a special. So
Okay.
It is a bit more work for him. So if the board wants to take that action, and I would do that as a separate motion once everything else is out of the way, just so that the record is clear.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I do see other people on, so I don't know and I don't see faces, so I can't see anybody doing like a little wave if they want to be heard on any of this. Is there any of the public that would like to be heard? Okay,
Jill Mann does have her hand up.
I can't see Jill.
Oh, okay, I didn't put myself, I thought it'd be distracting. I can add the video if you want.
No, I just that I can't see if you're trying to get my attention.
Oh, you know what? I raised my hand on the participant side.
Oh, okay. I get it.
So I just wanted, honestly, I'm very concerned about a reduced quorum. I just don't know that I think that's an appropriate thing. If we have not yet taken all measures to ensure that we can provide a quorum under our normal scenario. 10% of what we have is 10 people. I just don't think that's fair. We're having it indoors. I know that Topsfield, in an attempt to ensure that they can get quorum, because people are afraid, whether it's justifiable or not, they're afraid. Are we able to contemplate having it outdoor under a tent so that we can get people?
We have not. We have sufficient area indoors, doors that are open. Again, I can't speak that people are going to be more scared indoors, outdoors, or whatever. I mean, we tend to have the same. We may very well have 100 people show up. I can't guarantee you that, but I'd like to keep the town operating.
Well, you can. They have that. That's not true. So they have that
The
112.
112. So I understand the 112. And that's just.
That keeps the town operating. And my fear, honestly, Mr. Chairman, is that, you're circumventing the town process. And I don't know that there's an emergency measure and people don't want to come inside. I do. I don't care. But you obviously think that there's a potential to not have people come in because we're looking to reduce the quorum.
I think with a reduced quorum, and we're going to, not to 10% that is permissible by the new legislation, we're going to 35% of the normal quorum. I think there will be more people attending than if we did not change the quorum.
And secondly, I think we gave a lot of thought to this. The concern was because we moved our town meeting and moved it and then moved it again, we're near the end of the fiscal year. If we kept our quorum at 100, which is what our charter allows, and 95 people show up and we don't have 100, then we're stuck without a budget, and we're also stuck without the ability to get the adequate time for a 1/12 budget to be approved. Secondly, while a 1/12 budget is a mechanism that some communities are taking, not all, quite honestly, a lot more are doing later town meetings and affecting their quorum numbers to ensure that they have enough to operate. The reality is with a 1/12, that would trigger some activities that could be problematic through, for example, contracts that have been approved won't be able to be funded because it's based on a previous fiscal year. And quite honestly, given the changes we've made to our budget, I think could be somewhat problematic. Lastly, if economic conditions continue, we may be in a fall town meeting doing a lot more than we usually do in a town meeting. We may be looking at making potential changes to our budget due to changes that are happening already economically.
Oh,
So
oh, I'm sure.
I don't disagree, Jill. I think we try to do this judiciously in a way that, and it doesn't mean if we move the quorum to 35, that once we have 35 people, we close the doors. You know, we could still have the numbers that we normally have. I hope we have good numbers, but I think this will give us the ability to at least move forward in a way that we've been really transparent about from the beginning, and I hope folks will take advantage of.
Okay. So there is then no contemplation of holding it in a place that would be outdoors?
No, I mean, you run into so many problems with ADA and all, renting a tent, and you can't have sides on it. And that, I mean, no, I mean, I was on an hour-long conference today. The next most acceptable thing that people are doing is if you have representative town meeting, they're having virtual town meetings but that's only for representative town meetings. People
Yeah, I saw that in the bill.
People are really concerned about the ADA problem and the police and fire, et cetera. You know, it's not like we have the high school with a giant false field where, you know, that people can just go on the football field because it's, you know, fake grass. What we have in town just, I think would not be acceptable.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to speak my mind. I still am opposed to it, but I just felt as though I had to.
No, appreciate it.
So it's next week too, right? On the 16th?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the sole thing that's going to be heard at that meeting? Is it going to be? I
That's
saw
a-
the agenda.
That's a regular meeting that night, so regular business will be taken up and the quorum reduction will be just one
Okay.
item on the regular business agenda.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. So do I have a motion on this?
Well, the first one would be to rescind the two votes from last week.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we vote to rescind the approval that was granted at last week's Board of Selectmen meeting to approve two separate warrants for movement towards the annual town meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second,
All right, Mr. Cassiotis, if you could take a roll call vote.
Okay, Selectman Pentakis,
yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Selectman Cresta,
Yes.
Selectman Murski,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
Okay. And do I have a second motion to put Articles 1, 10, and 12? Is that what we're discussing?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve a warrant that includes Articles 1 through 10, Article 12, and Article 17 for consideration at our scheduled annual town meeting.
And would that also include to close the town meeting?
And yes, that does include closing the town meeting warrant. Thank you.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Mr. Cassiotis, could you take a roll call vote?
certainly. Selectman Pentakis,
Yes.
Selectman Cresta,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Selectman Murski,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that should the authors of the initiative petition Article 17 choose to not take action in this annual town meeting, that we would allow placement on the upcoming fall town meeting with the signatures that have been collected.
Okay, making that in the form of a motion?
That's my motion.
All right, do I have a second?
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Mr. Cassiotis, could you take a roll call vote?
Okay, Selectman Prentakis,
yes.
Selectman Cresta,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Selectman Moreski,
Yes.
and myself is yes.
All right.
Eileen, do we have to come in and sign a new warrant?
Okay, there we go. What did you say, Costa?
Or do we have to come in and for more signatures for the warrant now that we've taken this action?
Did you folks sign the previous warrant?
No, they signed an election warrant, but not the
No,
town
you
meeting.
came in to sign the election warrant. Now, we're posting a separate warrant, so it all needs to be signed.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I'm in all day tomorrow.
I'll prepare that and let everybody know, and I'll leave it with the clerk.
Very
Okay.
good.
very
That
good.
would be me.
All right, our next agenda item is a review and discuss procedure for authorizing outside dining at restaurants, including the serving of alcohol. Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we talked about this a little bit last week. I informed the board that we had a working group that was pulling together the pieces that we would need in order to allow restaurants to serve outdoors during the current phase of the so-called shutdown. We wrapped that up yesterday. I sent it out to the board last night, and what we have done is put together that working group has put together, and the working group consisted of Katrina O'Leary, Scott Fitzpatrick, Derek Fullerton, Chief Martinock, and myself. Put together an application package, a guideline, and a draft decision in 2 different forms for the review and approval of outdoor seating. And so laid out what we would want to see in terms of safety and spacing of tables and things like that. And then we expect that this is going to be a quick turnaround. We know that the restaurants are going to be anxious to open as quickly as they can. Even with this, they'll probably be hard pressed to get to 25% of their normal capacity. And we don't want to be the ones standing in the way of that. So our intent is to move this as quickly as we can. It will all be done online. We will be emailing this out to all the restaurants in town. As soon as it's approved by the board, they can respond to us by email. They can provide us with sketches. They don't have to go out and hire an engineering firm to survey their property and come up with a plan for what they want to do. As long as it's clear what they want to do and clear that they can meet the requirements, then we'll recommend issuance of the permit. And then in terms of the issuance itself, council has advised that the statute is open-ended enough to be able to interpret it that the board can delegate this authority if it chooses to do so. And I know that that's unusual because at least under the liquor statutes, that is solely the responsibility of the local licensing authority, which in Middleton is the Board of Selectmen. But I would ask the board to give some thought to delegating that authority so that we can move quickly on these applications.
I mean, I think I prefer delegating, the authority, to get so that we can move as rapidly as possible and not have to, wait for the next selectmen's meeting or, schedules, meetings every other day in order to meet the requests that have been filed and met the guidelines.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, in the spirit of, you know, cleanliness and staying consistent, I would agree on that, and give us a chance to apply specific rules for, you know, how many tables and, you know, how far apart and et cetera, for each of the different establishments who do apply.
So I agree. I think delegation makes sense in terms of timeliness. There are some items that I want to discuss as you finalize the process, and if this board delegates you, Andy, how you will be utilizing this. For example, and I've talked to you about this, you know, every restaurant is different. Every restaurant's location is different. Their parking lots, some are standalone, others are in a strip mall or a side area. So I think some of the areas that I have concern that I understand how it's going to be affected is if the outdoor seating is going to utilize parking spaces where normally vehicles are being parked. What is the protection that is ensuring that those individuals that are now sitting at a table are going to be protected from vehicles in the parking lot more than, you know, a post in a chain or a gated off area? You know, one of the landlords in town that has a restaurant as a tenant had reached out to me stating that they are looking to put these very large plastic bollards that you fill up with water that weigh in excess of 1,000 pounds to cordon off area. A, it would be easier to move than a big concrete bollard, but B, he as the landlord is extremely concerned about the safety for those individuals that are seated there. Secondly, I think one of the concerns I have is, again, how every location is different. We have some locations that have historically parking issues and taking a lot of parking spaces off the table. Now, if it's just parking for a certain restaurant that's there, that may be different because they're not going to be at 100% capacity, but how does that affect other tenants? How does that affect the requirement for accessible parking and other items like that? And then lastly, and I think you've talked about this in the draft that you put together, Andy, is the effect on other tenants there. And then just one more point I'll add is, you know, when we have a restaurant that's in a commercial district that is surrounded by a commercial district, it's not a big issue. When we have restaurants that are zoned correctly and they're operating correctly, but now there's a use change that is butting up against residential areas, that's going to be a little bit of a different issue than others. So I don't want to see a uniform policy for time or activity or parking use. I just want to know how you're going to kind of address those, Andy.
Sure.
And
So
we're going to delegate this. I don't want this board micromanaging your delegation either.
I second that too. So in terms of parking lot safety, the sort of default would be Jersey barriers. Now, nobody wants to be sitting having dinner with, you know, leaning up against a Jersey barrier. So those plastic, essentially they're plastic Jersey barriers that you talked about, Brian. I talked with Scott about that, and those are fully acceptable. You think about in a downtown location, if you're in Boston or you're in Salem or a place like that, you have outdoor seating. Usually it's on a sidewalk, so those customers, those diners, are protected by a curb. We don't have that in most of the settings that I can envision in Middleton. So the restaurants are going to have to put something up. So those plastic water-filled barriers are probably the easiest thing to do. A stanchion and a chain is not sufficient, and we would not allow them to open under that condition. So that would be what we expect to see the most common approach inside of existing parking lots. Places where there are existing known shortages of parking, we're going to have to deal with those on a case-by-case basis. I'm thinking about Freddy's Place down on South Main Street. I'm not sure that there's a parking shortage there, but I do know that there are a couple of vacancies there, and so there is added flexibility there, or there's less concern there. Maybe it's a better way to put it. Less concern that there'll be parking issues at that location if they want to have seating. Other places will be different, so we're going to have to deal with those case by case. And similarly with other tenants, to use the example of Freddie's Place again, I think the only other, on that side of that plaza, I think the only other business currently operating is the bike shop. And so I know there's another one that's getting ready to open, so we'll have to be aware of that. But those are those are things that we'll have to deal with. And I forgot the last one. Oh, the time. Yeah. So
time and location when it's up against residential.
Yeah. So that's an interesting potential conundrum for us. Some of these establishments will probably want to have at least outdoor music, or at least music playing outdoors. It gets much more difficult to sort of pick and choose and say, you can have music, but you can't have music. We can certainly do that the best way that we're able. I don't know if the board wants to step into that and just say, where this is an emergency situation, short-lived, probably through November at the latest, and maybe not even that long, that it would be, that there would be no outside entertainment. If you don't want to do that, I get that, and that's a hard decision to make, sort of sight unseen, blanket approach to all establishments. And if that's the case, we'll manage it the best that we can. And work with the owners.
I don't see how having outdoor entertainment or, music would enhance the business of the establishment. People will go to them. They've been cooped up. They haven't been able to go, out to dinner. They will go out. And I don't think, the entertainment, will, either the presence will, attract more people, or the absence will detract people from going. So I think it's much simpler just to say no outdoor entertainment.
Yeah, I'm leaning at myself. The Beatles aren't going to make you forget that you're sitting in a parking lot. I would want no outdoor entertainment. This is an emergency measure to help you go through. This is not to help, the dining.
I think the reality of this, Tim and board members, is that the success of this is going to be fast turnover of these tables. The days of going in and sitting for a couple of hours with friends and having a couple of drinks and dinner are not going to work for these restaurants that are utilizing outside dining. So I'm fine too with the elimination of extending this to include music and or any other entertainment that they would have within their entertainment license right now. Again, I'm concerned about the safety when it's in a parking lot. If it's up on a patio, or it's up in a curb, or it's up under a deck, that's different. Those structures are already built for that. And then for those areas, and there are a few in town that are abutting residential areas, I can think of a handful. I just want that to be surely taken into consideration. And that may include either a blanket decision of a certain time frame when these outdoor seating must cease, a certain hour of the day, or Andy, I'd like to hear how you could potentially differentiate within those.
Yeah, so I think we set, I know we talked about an end time. I don't remember if we actually put it into the,
Yeah, I didn't see it in the document, but maybe I missed it.
yeah, so what I was thinking
Beatles will take care of it.
is something like 9 o'clock as being the cutoff. And, or maybe we go 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday or something like that. But, we've talked about it before outside of the COVID emergency that it's hard to sit outside anyways in Middleton because of mosquitoes and other things. So, once the sun starts to go down, the critters come out. So, maybe a 9 o'clock across the board cutoff. Sunday to Thursday makes sense, and maybe we do 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, or we just do 9 o'clock across the board. I think there's a benefit to uniformity, and rather than saying you can stay open till 10 because you don't have a residential neighbor within 1,000 feet, but you have to close at 9 because you have a residential neighbor.
The other thing to remember, Andy, when you were discussing that the need for non-formality is that if any of these areas are serving alcohol, there's a requirement that the dimensions be sent to the ABCC. So I think they're going to have to be exact. This is not something they can write on the back of a napkin. This is, you don't have to hire a civil engineer, but you've got to know, because that's the only way the ABC, I was on a conference call today, can enforce it, is to know what the dimensions are.
Yeah.
And our Board of Health as well, for that matter. It's a good point.
Yeah, and I'd say in that case, while surely they do not have to have an engineer drawn to spec, but if there's an area, they should be able to give the dimensions, and they should be able to show in those dimensions, 3 tables of 4 or 2 tables of 2, whatever the case is, because while the approval may be given for a restaurant that has 3 different outdoor areas, and they're asking for 20 seats total, at some point, and I can absolutely see this happening, somebody is going to claim foul and somebody's going to have to go enforce. And is it going to be enforced based on, well, there's 20 seats, but if the 20 are all over here, or the plan called for this section 3 tables, this section 2 tables, this section 1 table, whatever the case is, because it's going to happen. There's going to be complaints that people will lodge.
Brian, on the conference call today, the ABCC told us of a town that passed it, and they've gotten 3 complaints on one place. The place hasn't even opened.
Yeah, it's going to happen. There's going to be folks that are either upset because there's a bigger party at one table and the other table isn't being used. Why aren't you seating me? They're going to complain. It's going to happen. I mean, until we all get, the greater community gets used to this new process and order.
Right. Any other discussion from the Board of Selectmen? Any discussion from the public at large? All right, do I have a motion?
I actually have something, Tim, I just am curious. So when we put this in place, I wasn't aware you could basically allow somebody else to do it. I thought it had to be somebody else. I didn't realize you could, I guess, assign your role because it was an alcohol license issue. But if town council said that, I've had other town councils tell me that wasn't the case in other communities I've had it happen in. So I just want to make sure that's really the case. Also, as far as the policies go, there's no posting anywhere. I don't know what they are. Can you just say what they are?
Yeah, Jill, it's all going to be sent out as early as maybe tonight or tomorrow at the latest, laying out what we need to see, giving you the application, what we need to see in terms of insurance affidavits or landlord affidavits, things like that, or landlord permissions, what we need to see on the plans.
So I assume it's the same thing as what's required by the ABCC right?
I would like to think that it's a simpler version of that, yeah.
Okay. And then what about the controls put in place? For example, when you were talking, my particular concern, obviously, I represent restaurants in town. So my particular concern was, I guess, relative to, being near residential uses, but being legally existing, non-conforming, is that going to actually restrict it? With regard to the entertainment license, I agree with the board 100%. There's no need for music. We just need to be able to serve. But relative to being adjacent to residential properties. I'm not sure I understand what's going to be put in place.
Well, I can give it just my
Yeah,
thoughts
please.
around that, Jill. So while it may be, use any location in town that is a restaurant that is zoned for it and is approved for it, their current license does not allow for exterior dining and exterior liquor. So under the change that has happened, it can be delegated. The board can delegate that, as well as delegate the alcohol, the change to the alcohol license. That's what the legislative change has allowed. Andy's worked with our council on that. And I think the reason why this board's going towards delegation is about time and speed. Because if we had a meeting tonight, we approved 3 of them, and then 2 days later, we got 2 more applications, we'd have to post the meeting, wait for a period of time and schedule it. We'd like to move quicker. Secondly, we think most of the restaurants are going to probably come in and just put a stake in the ground and say, we're interested in doing this. We may or may not do it, and do so. And then lastly, as it relates to those lots where there's restaurants that may be abutting residential areas, while you may be able to have a restaurant, right now you are not approved for outdoor dining. And I would argue if this emergency wasn't happening, we probably wouldn't be approving this. We wouldn't be entertaining, because of the fact of there's residential abutters. And this is where we're trying to balance the supporting the restaurants and the businesses to continue, and balance the neighbors. And Jill, I mean, I voted against a week or so ago because we just didn't have the information yet of what the governor was proposing. I'm not opposed to outside dining, but I just want to make sure that every location is not treated exactly the same, as we would take that on anybody that came before the board for a license or a change of license. We would not say, we're going to give this person a license and this facility that is completely different. We're going to entertain them all separately, and because they're all different.
And I understand, but my issue is, it isn't the board now. It's going to be administration. It's not you. It's not a public hearing. It's not the time to deliberate. It is you're delegating your rule. So I need to understand what that is. And there can't be amorphous criteria. There actually have to be defined criteria. And I'm just, obviously, you know why I'm concerned. I have a business and, that cannot operate, probably won't be able to operate for months. And if it cannot operate, that is going to be a catastrophe. So I need to know. And I'm not getting comfort from that because, I guess I am expecting comfort. So I need to know, are we going to be able to have something finite? Look, if you have a restaurant in a location and you can put people outside, you can put people outside as long as you comply with the barrier restrictions and you have no outdoor entertainment. I guess that's more what I'm looking for, because this board has to make the decision with regard to that type of guidance.
Well, I think what you're looking at is, we don't want to be so strict to say that everything is allowed or everything isn't allowed. What we're looking for is, let's assume you have a building and you could put it on the right or the left, and the right is more inconvenient for residents. We might make you put it on the left.
Oh yeah.
But what it's going to come down to is, does the fire department think it's safe? Does the police department think it's safe? Does the Board of Health think you've done the job? And then the town administrator acts on behalf. That's what it's coming down to.
So this has to go through the Board of Health, the fire department, and the police department?
They're going to have an input in to say, here, if you say, here's my plan, I'm going to put spaghetti up to block cars, then the police chief is going to say no.
Oh, I thought you said that there were already guidance in there saying what would create safe, those barriers, those.
Again, if I told you to put in Jersey barriers and you came up with the plastic ones, now I've prohibited you from doing it. We're not that specific. You'll get a general idea that we want safety of people in a parking lot, which is going to be different from safety on someone on a sidewalk, because there's not necessarily need of it. But there's not going to be a specific, you need a 3x5 barrier. That's going to be up to, take a look. You're going to work in conjunction with these agencies.
Again, that's even the safety aspects I'm not concerned of, because we can provide for that. I'm more concerned about being an abutter to a residential neighborhood where you know, we don't have outdoor seating now, we don't have outdoor drinking now. I'm not saying we do, but if you do not put in place something to basically say, even in those instances, as long as you don't have outdoor music, then we are going to temporarily allow it. I don't know how an administrator can say, okay, we're going to. I'm just very concerned about that. And before we close and vote on a guidance, I think the board needs to contemplate that and the effect that that can potentially have.
So the board could do that decision on their own. We could, I mean, if what you're saying, Jill, we could move this from it being delegated to the town administrator and every one of these being entertained by the board. And again, if that's the decision this board wants to do, I'll abide by it and follow it. We'll schedule our meetings accordingly. And quite honestly, we're going to be, if it is taken by the board, we're going to be looking at every one at a time. We're not going to come in and say, okay, you have a parking lot, you've come in, you have Jersey barriers, great, you can have X number of seats because you've asked for them. We're going to take things into consideration like safety, what the parking situation is like now, what the abutters situation is, and what the other tenants in that building are. So let's just say there's a restaurant next door is a retail establishment that's going to open. I mean, that may be saying this is going to be detrimental to my business. Then you, in part of your application, this is what Andy has talked about, is there's going to be some steps that will have to be followed. One of them is your landlord has to say yes.
Of course.
In consultation with, if you're setting up tables in front of another business, that is okay, that business doesn't feel that they're being impeded, because that's what will drive to us getting complaints. The complaints may be the abutter over, we believe there's too many people there, you're not following the rules. If we can make this clean and clear in the beginning, this should run smoothly through the period that the governor has entertained this to happen, and the period that we entertain, which may be through November 1st.
So nobody's still addressed. So my issue is, are you going to, what do you do for restaurants that abut residential areas directly?
I personally, if I was the one in the decision making, I would ask that proposal come in to take into consideration the effect that would be on those residents. I'm not opposed to having outdoor seating if there is a residential abutting it. I'm asking you to come in and say, this is how we're taking in advance. That may be, we can go until 9, but we're going to close at 8:30, or we're going to maybe put the seats over in this side of the parking area because it's less intrusive upon residential areas than this area that we would have proposed. Those are the items I want to take into consideration. It's not going to be, I have a parking lot, this is the parking situation, I want to take 10 spots and designate it for outdoor dining, and please approve that. Those are all going to be taken into consideration. There is no one size fits all, because every one of our restaurants is in a different location, a different setup, a different building, and a different item. I mean, that's my belief. I mean, if not, we can bring this back to the board and we can have a meeting on every single one of these. And I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of restaurants waiting in line for the board to take this up, and then residents coming in and giving input.
So Joe, maybe this would.
It doesn't, that honestly, if it's going to be an expedited process and it's level guidance, that's one thing, but you need to create guidance. I don't know.
Well, let me put it this way. Our guidance is that we want every restaurant that has the ability to take advantage of it. We're not signaling out anybody to not take advantage of it. So our message to the town administrator is, we want to help the restaurants in town. That's our message, whatever way we can. Now, can we be specific on each one? We can't, but we can just say that's our philosophy, and we're conveying it to Mr. Schuler.
So that there is, no blanket prohibition because the property abuts a residential use. But within that property, if there is a location that is less intrusive than another, then you should use the less intrusive one.
Okay, and that's what I want. That's what I'm kind of getting at, is there isn't a prohibition, because obviously that's a great concern. That's what my point was in the beginning. So that I appreciate. So
We're not
it would
saying
be
that-
alternative
no.
locations. Okay.
If that's your concern, we're not saying that
Greatly.
every restaurant is prohibited. Every restaurant that has the ability we want them to get it, providing they can do public safety, et cetera.
Abutting residential does not mean that you cannot have outdoor seating. You just have to be as cognizant of the neighbors as possible, and we are trying to do that while balancing the ability for that restaurant to open.
Measured. I'll get you. And then can I ask one more question is how long does it take from the time you submit to the time of issuance? Because clearly honestly, almost every town has acted with regard to this that I filed with since June 8th. I've already gotten permission to operate every restaurant I represent since then.
Well, you don't do anything in Lawrence. We haven't passed it yet.
You haven't done it yet? I don't do it there yet. So how long do you provide just because every day we don't open?
Mr. Sheehan has said probably could get to them within 48 hours.
Oh, that's a beautiful, okay, that's fantastic. I appreciate that, Mr. Sheehan. That's wonderful. Okay, that's all I wanted to ask. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sheehan will hear me instead of the rest of you then.
I believe we have one other member in the audience that would like to make a comment if you want to, or question, if you'd like
Who
to
is that?
take Roberto Crignali.
Okay, Mr. Crignali, can you unmute yourself?
How you doing, everybody?
Good.
I just had a question. So with the parking lot seating, is there a limit that the restaurants have that they can they only have X amount, a percentage of their total inside, or can they just use the parking lot as freely as they want?
No, because you have to have parking for the people. There's all sorts of formulas, and these got to be 6 feet apart, and they have to be. No, you couldn't use up your whole parking lot. For instance, the classic example is Kowloon. They have the world's biggest parking lot.
Yeah.
They're only limited to a certain portion that they could fit outside, and plus, it has to be contiguous with the building, et cetera. There's all sorts of rules. So yes, no one's ever going to even come close to what they could have on the inside.
Okay. So that will help with the off-street or on-street parking, right?
Exactly.
So there won't be that much overflow because they won't be able to have that many. Okay.
You're probably talking, 10 to 25% of what they have right now. So if you have, you're talking 25% of the cars that are there now, nobody's parking off site.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that we need to take into consideration, Mr. Chairman, is as things get better and we move through these phases and interior seating begins, and then possibly the percentage of the capacity that is utilized, we may be, and this may not be a bad thing, it could be a good thing. It means we're getting healthier. We could be looking at the end of October, November, possibly being close to a high percentage of the current seating capacity, including what is approved outside and what is allowed on inside. And that's why
if you notice, the motion would have that it would end either November 1st or when the pandemic has been, the emergency. So if the governor then said 100%, which we know is not going to happen for a while, then the outside seating would stop.
Yeah, and to Brian's point, we did have a conversation about that, and that is a concern that we have as well, that we don't know how the rest of the reopening is going to go. We don't know if he's going to say, you can open 25% inside, and then 50% inside, then 75, and then finally 100. And then we get to a point where, say, we allow exterior seating, outdoor seating that is 30% of their interior capacity, and then at some later point in the reopening process, they can seat 75% inside. So then they're beyond what their normal maximum capacity is. That's where we step in and we say, okay, you have to start eliminating your exterior seating or your interior seating, such that you don't trip over that.
And I think the reality is that, restaurants aren't going to want to keep the outside. It's subject to weather. It's subject to everything. It's one thing if you're in, Marblehead looking over the ocean. That's great. it's another thing if you're looking at, your neighbor's backyard, or you're looking at,
Or a dumpster.
yeah, exactly. All righty, do I have a motion on these two?
Can I speak on this item?
Who is this?
I'm Jim Reynolds, 3 Edgewood Road, Middleton.
Hi, Mr. Reynolds. We can't see you, so just so you know. So I didn't know.
I apologize. I'm on a phone, but I'm talking to you. I see you on the monitor.
Oh, great.
All right. My question is in regards to Maggie's Restaurant. If they take a third or 2/3 of the parking lot and put it into eating facilities, does that mean that those people that would normally park in the parking lot now can go up to Meadow Drive and park?
No, because
No.
there's nobody parking, there's nobody eating in the inside, so nobody would be parking. That would be, normally what you have in Meadow Drive is the people that would be parked eating inside park on Meadow Drive, but there's no one parking, so so let's assume that all the people that are outside are inside. You're now at a 25% capacity, so you're gonna have less cars.
I understand that, but if you take up the parking lot and use portions of the parking lot for,
You're not gonna allow, no, they have to have service. We're not allowing them to take up an entire parking lot. Then they wouldn't qualify because they don't have any parking.
thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. All right, looking for the motions.
Before this, can I just ask one question of Andy? Is there a guide that you're taking in terms of, let's say a restaurant, just for sake of clean numbers, has current approval for 100 seats? Are you taking a guidepost that they're going to come in and ask for no more than X percentage for exterior seating?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and I think we have thoughts about that, but we haven't laid that out in these requirements, simply because every place is different. And in a way, it would be easier to just say the maximum outdoor seating capacity is 25% of your indoor capacity and leave it at that. But depending on the nature of the site, it may be that some places can do better than that, can do more than that.
And you're gonna be somewhat self-limiting by the fact that there's 6 at a table. The tables have to be spread so far apart. There has to be ability, you have to have, I don't see this as a win for these places. I see this as a life jacket when
It's
you're
a it's a lifeline for them, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I'll move to delegate to the town administrator and the TOTA group the authority to approve outside dining and liquor service.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. Do I have any further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Castiota, could you take a roll call vote?
Okay, sir. Selectman Prentakis,
Yes.
Selectman Cresta,
Yes.
so, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and Selectman Moreski,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
All righty.
Andy, are you, is the sole, if there are complaints that are filed, which I hope they're not, but if there are complaints that are filed, who is the arbiter of those?
No, we didn't really lay that out. I think what will happen is that it comes to this working group, and ultimately to me, initially, and if it's irreconcilable or we can't resolve it, then it probably would escalate to the board. It's not my preference, only because something has to happen in the interim, and we either have to shut them down and we have an unhappy restaurant with a cooler full of food that is not being put to good use, or we have a disgruntled abutter or landlord or whatever it is that has to wait for the board to make a decision. So we would hope to be able to resolve it. We're going to need cooperation and reasonableness from the restaurants, that they realize that that what we're doing is to help them, and we're not there to hinder them, but it has to be a two-way street, and that they have to be reasonable in what they're requesting of us.
Thank you.
Very good.
Any other new business?
I just want to thank everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
I'll let everybody know when the warrant is ready. I should have that tomorrow, probably.
Okay.
Just not so much new business, but I'd just like to call out, I know many of the folks on this board, maybe some of the folks on the phone, heard last week of the passing of Michelle Fitzpatrick, very long time principal at Fuller Meadow and Howe Manning, and a woman that made a huge difference in the education of a lot of people in this town. I had the opportunity to work with her years ago as a legislator, and then had the opportunity as a parent of 2 children that she was a principal of. And she was a huge shining star in this community. You know, her retirement was tough for the school district to take because she did such great work. And I think the world's a little bit less brighter with Michelle's passing. So I wanted to make sure before this meeting was over that we recognized her. I know as a board in the town, we recognized her a few years back with the naming of the roadway in front of Howe Manning as Fitzpatrick Way. But I think it's important to note that her passing has left a big void.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. We stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
And I thank you.
Well, have a good night.